In my opinion, Christopher Nolan is the best director living. I think this is a hill that I'm willing to die upon. I watched Oppenheimer. I was satisfied. I feel like I understood the movie by the end. And for me, this is the best Christopher Nolan movie that I've watched to date. I mean, Dunkirk is still up there for me, but in this movie, man, it was the perfect movie, the perfect storm, the perfect everything that I want from a movie was achieved by this. Number one thing is when a movie opens up, I always feel it asks us a question that it has to satisfy. And this movie, when it starts, the opening 5 minutes, the amount of information that you're hit with, a lot of it doesn't make sense. You're like, hey, what are we watching here? And at the end, it's like, whoa, wow, I see what happened. The one thing that I like about Christopher Nolan movies over the time is how secular the movies are. It's like we started a journey and we go around and we come back to where we started and we're like, wow, what a journey. The movie holds us hand by hand and it takes us through this journey, which is perfect. For me, this movie, when they were promoting it, they made it seem as if it's all about the bomb, the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer is known as the father of the atomic bomb. But when you go in there, it's totally different, which is something that I feel like they did with Babylon, where the marketing for me, I feel like is false. And because a lot of people are focused on the spectacle, it takes away from what makes the movie special. In this movie, what makes the movie special for me is the story between Oppenheimer and Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Louis Strauss, I believe that's his name. That journey that we go through of, call it a misunderstanding or whatever that Nolan is trying to push, it's a movie that makes us question a lot of things that happen when we're watching it. The movie makes us question a lot of things in terms of the relationship that Oppenheimer had as the person. This is a biofilm. It's different from watching Avengers Infinity War or the Batman or stuff like that, where there's a central theme to the story that we're following. But in this, what I like mainly about it is the way the story is told and how we had these public hearings. I'm someone who doesn't know the book Prometheus, someone who doesn't know the history of Oppenheimer. But the one thing that we get in and you quickly understand is what the film is depicting and the two timeline differences, whereby one, we are at the current moment with Robert Downey Jr.'s character who wants to get into Congress, and on the other hand, we are having the trial of Oppenheimer for him to get his security clearance back, and then how the movie shows us the events that happened and how everything is going on at not in chronological order, but like the order makes sense by the end of the movie. And for a lot of people, some of the complaints that I've heard is, oh, this makes no sense. You should make it a linear. But for me, as someone who's grown up watching a lot of Christopher Nolan movies, I felt that everything that happened in this was perfect. This for me, I don't want to call it a masterpiece because I feel like Dunkirk was his masterpiece. That I feel like this is a great movie. Like it's just perfect, man. Like the themes, the everything that a movie needs to touch upon is touched upon. One of my biggest cons with a movie, because not everything is perfect, definitely. Well, for me, it was the sex scene between Cillian Murphy's character and Florence Pugh, and I couldn't wrap my mind around why it didn't work. I feel like either A, the story didn't take us there because the way Oppenheimer is portrayed, it doesn't make him seem like a man with emotion, right? It's not like he's a man and all of a sudden you have the sex scene, and I just felt like there was just something off. Like the chemistry was not on, or it wasn't, what you're expecting from it, that you don't really want it. Like it's not like I'm interested in this. And I think that either the setup was bad or I don't know, like, I don't know what Nolan was going for, but something about the sex scene didn't work for me. But other than that, everything else, it was perfect. They touched on Oppenheimer being a communist and how that affected, you know, how that became a big elephant in the room of him being in control and in charge of creating the atomic bomb, and how the Russians started all of a sudden getting information on the atomic bomb, and also how, you know, his role, what was his role. And they say posthumously people have been able to prove that this guy's his critics were correct. which is not what the movie pushes, but what I feel the movie does is it makes us question things. And I think that's one thing about Christopher Nolan is his movies always make us have discussions post watching it. Like there's always room for debate. Like, what did this mean? What did you think? This is what I interpreted. This is what you interpreted. Okay, should we watch it again? And for me, definitely, it's a movie that I'm willing and I'm open to going to watch again. I've stated it. This is for me. This year is the best movie I've watched. I've never been satisfied. Like I've watched a lot of movies and you just like, eh. But when I watched this one, I was like, I get it and I understand it and I loved it. I loved the cinematography. I felt for Hoyt because my understanding from what I've heard is the IMAX cameras are super heavy. Like I think in one video he says the camera weighs like a little mini bar fridge, so you could tell compositionally there's a lot of limitations to what one can do compared to these other cameras which you can move around, whereas with this you can't really move it around. You can't really do a lot of things because as a cinematographer you are limited. But what I feel Hoyt did perfectly was always the composition and how the actors, like, one thing I like about it, there's a moment when Cillian Murphy's character is being interviewed and his wife, played by Emily Blunt, is sitting there and you can just see her reactions to what he's saying. And she was so in tune with what's going on, which is the same with Rami Malek. He plays a background character for most of the movie, but his facial expressions, like the way Nolan just got all his actors engaged is perfection, man. Like this is pure movie making because this is like depicting reality or humanity, how we react. We're not just there being blank stereotype. I see sometimes when I'm directing movies, you see when an actor or an actress is not engaged, they go away and start thinking of their lines and start thinking of separate things, and then they get engaged when it's their turn to speak. But in this movie, it felt like everybody was involved. Everybody wanted to create the best movie that they can create, and that's what they did. Cinematography wise, I wasn't expecting crazy shots. They made a lot of hype about the mom, like it's gonna be the most beautiful thing you see, and it is. But for me, it wasn't the heart of the movie. The heart of the movie is in the characters. It's in the people. It's in Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. Like the way he delivers that character. Whilst you wanna hate him, you love him. You love the performance. You're like, man, this is Iron Man. Like, come on. And at the end of it, you also understand, right? Everything about it makes you understand where each character is coming from and where each character is going. And then you also understand what the director wants you to sort of glean from the movie, which is what makes Oppenheimer perfect for me. The two quotes that I took out of the movie: "Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds." The concept of atomic bombs is a scary thing. One of his biggest fears was, what have we done? There's one part of the movie where they say, if we blow this, we can burn the world. And the thought of that is they ended up doing it. They threw the bombs knowing what the bombs could do. That's something that's terrifying. But how now the world, we live in a space where a lot of countries have these nuclear bombs, at any point the nuclear arm race, it's something that's terrifying and it's something that can become so real so fast. And in this movie, you see how his fears have become our reality in this day. Another quote that he uses: "They won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they've used it." And I think that's one thing. It's like before these bombs became a reality, they didn't understand it. And after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, I feel like everybody understands how devastating and how much damage these bombs can create and cause, especially if applied. And that's one thing that I think as humans we will live in fear of until we die, until we leave this planet, knowing that at one point a few men can make a decision, a few men and women can make a decision that ends it for all of us, and we have no say in that. The impact of these bombs in the Second World War, where some might say it wasn't necessary, is scary. It's a scary thought. It's a scary thing, the things that have happened to this day. And the other thing that I like about this movie is how you see how Cillian Murphy carries the pain and the burden of the responsibility that Oppenheimer carried for his work, but also how self-centered he might have been. He created the bomb, but he didn't drop it, and how much that would have weighed on the president at that time, and how at this point in time it makes us all question like the things we do, the things that we do that can harm people, how that affects us, and how guilt is, and how much that guilt you feel also can come from a self of you being self-centered, right? Like, I don't know how else to explain this to you, but I feel like if you haven't watched it, you should go watch this movie, especially in IMAX. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The music or score for me at certain points was too much, but it made sense. But then I just felt like for 3 hours, it's like, man, come on, give me a rest, give my ears a rest for a little bit. But I guess that's because I watched it in IMAX, so maybe that was that. But other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not gonna be one of those people who comes out and say this was the Christopher Nolan masterpiece, because I feel that was Dunkirk. But I feel like this is up there as one of his best movies ever. And for me, this is my favorite movie that I've watched this year. I look forward to watching Barbie. I look forward to watching Napoleon and Dune. But this movie, it just gave me, I think one of the things that makes it perfect is an intellectual movie. It's a movie that makes you think, and it engages your intelligence. It doesn't really want you to be, how can I put it? It's a movie that doesn't want you to let go of your disbelief. It's built in reality, and it makes you think, and it doesn't make a fool of the audience. It appreciates your intelligence, and that's one thing that I truly appreciate about it. This movie is a must watch.